Think about a memory you are completely certain of. A specific moment, a holiday, an argument, a conversation you had. You can probably see it. You can feel the emotional temperature of the room. You could almost certainly describe what someone was wearing. Now imagine being told that the memory you just pictured is partly wrong. Not vague. Not faded. Wrong. That is not a theory about forgetfulness. That is what the evidence shows. And the real answer is far stranger than a simple failure of recall. Your memory is not a recording. It was never a recording. Every time you remember something, your brain does not press play on a saved file. It reconstructs the scene from scratch, using whatever fragments are still available, and in the process of reconstructing it, it quietly rewrites it, fills in the missing pieces, and then saves the new version over the old one. The original is gone. What remains is the story you told yourself the last time you remembered. This is happening right now, to every memory you have. In 1932, the British psychologist Frederick Bartlett ran a series of experiments that would quietly change how scientists understood the mind. He asked a group of English university students to read a short Native American folktale called The War of the Ghosts, a story filled with unfamiliar imagery, unusual names, and a narrative logic that didn't match what his participants expected from a story. Then he asked them to recall it. Not immediately. Days later. Weeks later. Months later. What came back was not the story. It was a ghost of the story, rebuilt in the image of what each person already believed about how stories should work. The unfamiliar details were smoothed away. The gaps were filled with things that made sense to an English reader in the 1930s. The supernatural elements were quietly rationalized into something more logical. The story became, in Bartlett's own word, a schema, a skeleton built from pre-existing expectations, and then fleshed out with invented details that each participant genuinely believed they had read. They were not lying. That is the part that matters. They were remembering. They just had no idea that what they were remembering had already been rebuilt in their image. Every time they had recalled the story, they had made it a little more familiar, a little more coherent, a little more like the stories they already knew. The act of remembering had done the rewriting. The clearest evidence for this came in the 1970s and 1980s, when the psychologist Elizabeth Loftus began studying eyewitness testimony and found something that would shake the foundations of the legal system's trust in human memory for decades. In one experiment, she showed participants footage of a car accident and then asked them a single question, but she changed one word. Some were asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other. Others were asked how fast they were going when they hit each other. One word changed the number. People who heard smashed estimated the cars to have been traveling significantly faster than people who heard hit. When both groups were asked a week later whether they had seen broken glass in the footage, the smashed group was far more likely to say yes. There was no broken glass. The question had created the memory. A single word, slipped into a question after the fact, had altered what people believed they had seen with their own eyes. Loftus pressed further. In a series of studies that still provoke unease, she demonstrated that entirely false memories of events that never happened at all could be planted with nothing more than careful suggestion. Adults came to vividly remember being lost in a shopping mall as children. Others recalled being attacked by a dog. Participants in one study were led to believe they had shaken hands with Bugs Bunny at Disneyland, which is impossible. Bugs Bunny is a Warner Brothers character and has never appeared there. The memories felt real. They arrived with emotions, with sensory details, with the weight of lived experience. The participants defended them. What this means is uncomfortable. Your confidence in a memory tells you almost nothing about whether it happened the way you remember it. The feeling of certainty is not evidence of accuracy. It is just a feeling. The two things are almost completely unrelated. For a long time, scientists believed that a fully formed memory was stable. Once a memory had moved from short-term storage into long-term storage, a process called consolidation, it was assumed to be fixed. The writing was done. The file was saved. Whatever the memory was, that was what it was. Then in 2000, the neuroscientist Kareem Nader published a study that changed the field. He had trained rats to fear a specific sound by pairing it with a mild electric shock, a standard fear conditioning procedure. Once the fear memory was fully consolidated, he did something unusual. He reactivated it. He played the sound again, causing the rats to recall the memory. Then he injected a drug into a specific region of their brains that blocked protein synthesis, the biological process the brain requires to build and stabilize new structures. What should not have happened? The fear memory disappeared. A memory that was fully formed, fully consolidated, erased, because the act of recalling it had briefly made it unstable again. The memory had opened back up, like a document being edited, and when the ability to save it again was blocked, it was lost entirely. What Nader had found is now called reconsolidation. Every time a memory is retrieved, it briefly becomes plastic again. It becomes open to editing. Open to distortion. Open to the influence of whatever is present in the moment of recall, the mood you are in, the conversation you just had, the version of yourself you are now compared to the version who originally lived the event. When you remember something, you are not reading from a fixed file. You are reopening a document, editing it with everything you currently know and feel and believe, and then saving a new version. The previous version is overwritten. There is no access to the original. There never was. Think about what that means for the memories you would most want to protect. A conversation with someone who is no longer alive. The moment you first understood something that changed everything. The version of a relationship you carry that feels the truest. Every time you have returned to those memories, every time you have grieved them, examined them, drawn comfort from them, you have changed them. Not intentionally. Not avoidably. The recall itself was the editing. This has a strange consequence that most people never consider. The memories you have revisited most often, the ones you have told as stories at dinner tables, the ones you have replayed in quiet moments, the ones you have shaped and reshaped into the version that makes the most sense, those are the ones that have been edited the most times. The most remembered memories are often the most distorted ones. The memories closest to what actually happened are the ones you have never gone back to. The ones you have barely touched since the moment they formed. And you have probably already forgotten most of them. It also means that remembering is an act of the present, not a window into the past. When you recall a conversation, you are not retrieving what was said. You are reconstructing it using your current understanding of the other person, your current feelings about the relationship, your current beliefs about who you both were and what was really happening between you. The memory reveals as much about who you are now as about what happened then. This explains something most people assume must have a simpler explanation. It explains why two people can remember the same argument with total, genuine certainty and arrive at completely opposite accounts of what was said. Neither is lying. Neither is selectively misremembering in their own favor out of bad faith. Both have simply reconstructed the event from their own schema. Their own emotional state at the time, and then rebuilt it again and again every time they return to it, each rebuilding drifting a little further from a shared truth neither of them can access anymore. It explains why flashbulb memories, those vivid, emotionally charged recollections of exactly where you were and what you were doing when something shocking happened, are not actually more accurate than ordinary memories. Researchers who followed the same people's accounts of the same major events over months and then years found that the details shifted, sometimes dramatically, even as the emotional certainty never wavered. The vividness of the memory and the accuracy of the memory are two separate things entirely, and the first one has almost no bearing on the second. And it explains why the legal system's trust in eyewitness testimony has quietly crumbled under the weight of DNA evidence. Case after case has shown that confident, detailed, sincere, emotionally certain witness accounts turned out to be wrong. Not fabricated. Not exaggerated. Simply wrong. The witnesses remembered exactly what they remembered. Memory just does not work the way anyone assumed it did for most of recorded history. So what do you do with this? You cannot stop remembering. You cannot stop the reconstruction from happening every time a memory surfaces. The process is automatic, unconscious, and you have no access to it while it is running. But you can change what it means when a memory feels certain. Vividness is not evidence. Emotional weight is not evidence. The story you have built about your own past is a story shaped by who you were each time you told it, filtered through every feeling and belief and conversation that surrounded each retelling. That does not make it meaningless. It makes it something other than what you thought it was. Not a record of the past. A portrait of every version of yourself that has ever looked back at it. You are not a camera that recorded your own life. You are a narrator who has been writing and rewriting the same story for as long as you can remember. Think about that memory again. The one you were certain of. The specific moment, the holiday, the argument, the conversation, what someone was wearing. You did not retrieve it just now. You rebuilt it. And somewhere in the space between what actually happened and the version that just surfaced, the original slipped a little further away. It always does. That is not a failure of memory. That is memory. It has always worked this way, for every human who has ever tried to hold on to the past.